So what are the prospects for tax reform after the failure of Obamacare repeal and replace, or at least so far that failure? Here to talk about that, White House Legislative Affairs Director Marc Short. Marc, thanks for being here.
Brett, thanks for having me on.
Let me start off where John left off, and that is the president's kind of hopeful pitch about bringing back this repeal, Graham Cassidy bill. Do you really think you have the votes?
I think we'll get the votes, Brett. I think the reality is the American people have spoken many times on this. They spoke in 2010 when they elected a new House to say, we want you to repeal Obamacare. In 2014, they switched power, gave us 9 new Republican senators. We expect you to repeal Obamacare. It was part of the 2016 campaign. It is a promise Republicans have made to voters, and voters are not going to give up. Obamacare is only getting worse. Insurers are fleeing markets. Rates are continuing to spiral. And, Brett, next year, a brand new tax on every plan. Every American family is to pay another $500 in taxes on Obamacare. It's only going to get worse, and the cry of the American people will finally be heard by Congress, and they will finally repeal Obamacare, and we're looking forward to getting it done.
He said that the reconciliation will pop back in. As you know, you have to put it in. Budget resolutions, is the plan to do that?
So next year there'll be another budget, and at that point we would look for reconciliation instructions to allow us to work on health care. Yes, exactly.
Let's turn to tax reform. You sound optimistic, but as we know, this thing gets churned in the sausage grinder that is the Capitol Hill process. Do you think that this framework is going to hold?
We are confident in this framework. We think it's one that will work. We think it's what's best for the American economy. It's best for the American family, providing them with significant tax relief, but also keeping jobs here in America, which is something that the last administration suffered through. America has suffered. The last administration had a 1.8% GDP over its 10 years. That's the worst growth rate of any president since the Great Depression and Herbert Hoover. We need to get this economy growing again, and Congress knows that, the American people know that, and we need tax relief.
Now, you have the Freedom Caucus in the House already signing on as a block to this. But there are some up there on Capitol Hill who are concerned about how you're going to pay for this. What is going to happen? Is it going to be deficit neutral? Will you increase the deficit or the national debt, which now stands at $20 trillion?
Well, let's tackle that in two ways. One is that the president is committed to cleaning up the tax code. It is far too complicated. And by simplifying the tax code, you're going to get rid of many of the deductions, which is our way of paying for it. Many of the wealthy who have the best tax advisors are ones taking advantage of those deductions. And by cleaning it up, we're going to raise revenue. But it's also interesting to hear so many people now lecture on the deficit neutrality when over the last 8 years of the Obama presidency, we added $10 trillion to our debt. In the previous 230 years of our country, we had $10 trillion in debt. So now over the last 8 years, we've doubled our national debt, and those same Democrats are now going to lecture and say, hey, it's got to make sure it's deficit neutral. So we believe it's important to actually get the economy growing again, even if that incurs some initial deficit. We think the growth will add much more revenue over the long term.
In order to do that, you have to use what's called dynamic scoring,
Correct.
Which is, explain that to folks. It's essentially calculating what the growth is going to do for businesses and everything around the individual.
Exactly. If you go back to the Kennedy tax cuts, the Reagan tax cuts, there was very significant growth that occurred. It wouldn't have been captured in normal scoring because there's an estimation of what growth happens because of the renewed investment, because businesses and individuals have more income to actually invest. And so dynamic scoring takes that into account.
And can you do that by the rules of the reconciliation?
We will be able to, what's happened already, Brett, instead of the dynamic scoring, is that Senator Corker, Senator Toomey struck a deal to allow $1.5 trillion in this tax relief in the budget. So that gives us the window to have the room and capacity to do our tax relief.
But you have to pass the budget in order to get there.
Exactly right.
Which is coming up first.
Yes,
all right, I'm going to break down Senator Schumer's criticism of a couple specific things and have you react to it. First of all, here he is on the corporate tax cut proposed.
They're plush with money already. There's no proof, no real belief, no real argument that they're going to take this new money and put it into creating jobs.
Talking there about companies, obviously.
Right. Well, I know that Senator Schumer probably assumes that central planners have a better way of reinvesting Americans' dollars. We think by allowing Americans to own those dollars, they can do a better job of creating jobs. And the reality is that too many jobs have fled America's shores. They've gone overseas because our corporate tax structure is no longer competitive with other countries around the globe. So what we're looking to do is to bring those jobs back. And by reducing the corporate rate, I think you'll see far fewer inversions, and you'll in fact see many of those companies coming back to America to create jobs.
And the pass-through number goes down significantly. The individual tax for a business that has to file taxes that way.
That's exactly right. That is significantly reduced as well, down to 25%.
Okay, here is Senator Schumer on the estate tax being cut.
The estate tax is so skewed to the very wealthiest among us, and they're going to repeal it. This is not going to fly with the American people, let me tell you.
Is it going to fly?
Well, I think that many of those who benefit from the provisions that he's talking about live in his state, and what they have is they have very wealthy accountants and tax lawyers who help make sure none of them pay estate taxes. The people most impacted by the death tax today are farmers across the middle of America whose farms have been owned for generations in their family, who are hurt by it when their property is taken away from them. That's who we're trying to protect, is the farmers across middle America.
Last one. He says this is going to result in you touching entitlements in some way, shape, or form.
Americans beware. That's what they do. Dramatically lower taxes on the wealthy, do it in an irresponsible way, and then they say the big deficit we just created forces us to cut Medicare and Social Security.
Is that the plan?
Well, as I mentioned, it's kind of ironic to hear him lecture us about deficits when they just added $10 trillion to our national deficit during the Obama years. But no, we're not looking to touch entitlements with this plan.
Marc, we appreciate your time.
Brett, thanks for having me on.